Hi there, and welcome to this week's edition of the Gersnet Weekly Podcast, the independent Rangers podcast, which is made by fans for fans, and where the content is absolutely free. And as I tell you every week, guys, we do more than the podcast. We've got Hi there, guys. We're going to go for take two there. We had a bit of a technical issue with the YouTube stream. So hi there, and welcome for the second time to the Gersnet Weekly Podcast, the independent Rangers podcast made by fans for fans, and where the content is absolutely free. And as I keep on saying to you guys every week, it is not just the pod that we have free. We also have the forums. We have articles online every week. There's the social media stuff. There's a history archive, and it's all original, independent, and free content made by us for you. It is episode 113 of the Gersnet Weekly Podcast. I am your host tonight, Colin Armstrong, and I have made a total arse of the start of the show here. It is after. I'm going to start again. If you're a first-time listener to the show, then we would ask you to subscribe and share on social media. We have over 3,500 subscribers at the moment, so thanks so far. The pod is live tonight, and it has been an absolute disaster, but it will be available to download or stream on a variety of platforms from tomorrow, including Acast, iTunes, YouTube, Castbox, Stitcher, and Spotify. So let's get over that absolute disaster of a start and bring the guests in. We've got Douglas and John McCallum tonight. Douglas, how are you? Are you still there?
I am still here. I am very well, mate. That was 4 minutes of introduction there, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's the new setup here, and I was halfway through my intro at the start, and all of a sudden I was getting feedback. It was all linked, and I couldn't find where it was coming from, so I had to sort of mute for a wee bit and try and find what the issue was. But I found it. But bit of a disastrous start.
I thought you just got excited about the pre-pod debate that we were having there.
Well, that got me worked up a wee bit, I must admit, especially John's view. But we'll come on to all that later on, and we'll bring John in now. How are you, John?
Not too bad. Not too bad. That was a suitable opening for me being back on the show again. So no, good stuff, Colin. That's good. Let's try and keep that level of professionalism up for the next hour.
Well, that's why we're free, John. Let's be honest.
Frankly,
there's absolutely no way we could charge for this shit.
Yeah, I think we'll maybe need to start paying people to listen soon.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Let's see. I'll have a wee look at how many are listening now. I think we had about 3 on to start with, and after 2 minutes of my introduction, it went totally south. So anyway, yeah. So guys, obviously no football this week in terms of Rangers. It was the international break. So I thought we would have a wee look at that. There was a lot of stuff through the week with Scotland qualifying, a lot of stuff online on Twitter and all the rest of it about Rangers fans either wanting to support Scotland or not wanting to support Scotland. So I thought we'd have a wee discussion about that and how we've come to that. And obviously there was some stuff with Leigh Griffiths and all that as well. Maybe have a wee look at that. I also thought we would have a wee sort of the season so far. Have a look at how Rangers have done so far this season. Obviously, all positive, but is there anything we could maybe improve on, and how do we do things moving forward? And then we're back to league business next Sunday at Ibrox, so have a wee sneak preview of that. And also, I was kindly reminded by Dougie tonight that the League Cup draw took place today, and Rangers have been drawn against Falkirk. So that will take place on the weekend of the 28th or the 29th of November. So, John, I'll come to you first. Falkirk, I mean, just down the road from me, I might actually get in and see them. But surely you think we would get through that game?
You would expect to. Yeah, I mean, that's a good draw away from home, I suppose. It's the only thing against it. Cups can be funny. You know that. We've seen this in the past. Sometimes going to these kind of grounds can be a bit challenging, particularly in the middle of winter. But all things being even, that's as good a draw as we could get, other than it being at home. So yeah, bring it on. I've always enjoyed the League Cup. League Cup was one of my kind of first kind of cups. Supporting Rangers was the League Cup. And it was the kind of cup we did best in my early days supporting Rangers. So I've always had a soft spot for it. So look forward to that. Falkirk are down. They're kind of League One just now.
Yeah.
I think they're doing okay in League One, but they're not the team that they maybe were a decade or so ago. I think that's a pretty decent draw for Rangers. And like you say, a handy one for you. You can watch from the house.
Yeah, I probably could actually if I had a set of binoculars. Dougie, I mean, I've got the full draw here. Celtic against Ross County, us against Falkirk, Livingston v St Mirren, Livingston versus Ayr United, St Mirren v Aberdeen, Hibs v Dundee, Arbroath v Dunfermline, Motherwell St Johnstone, Alloa Hearts. I mean, another thing with Falkirk at the moment is they've got one of these plastic pitches as well, which is a pitch that we obviously don't like. But you would expect us to get through it. And also, if we do get through it, there's no one in there that you wouldn't fancy getting past again.
Yeah, good draw. Returns to Falkirk for Scott Arfield and Ross Wilson. As you said, it's going to be another plastic pitch. And as John said, they're in League One. They're sitting second behind, I think it's Cove Rangers. There was certainly worse draws available. There's 2 all Premiership clashes there. There was 3 Premiership teams in the unseeded section, so it could have been a worse draw for us. I had a quick glance at the Falkirk squad actually before we came on, and there's a few familiar names in there. Some ex-SPL players that are probably in their twilight years. Guys like Connor Salmon, Lee Miller, Morgaro Gomez, Paul Dixon, and then there's guys like Blair Alston and dare I raise Charlie Telfer. So Falkirk do have a fairly decent team, pretty experienced. It is definitely winnable. My only gripe, I know that you live local. My only gripe is the cup games are shown in Premier Sports. It's a subscription I don't have, and nor will I take out, so I won't see the game live. We'll have to wait for the highlights. Might come over to yours and let's peer over a fence and see if we can see the game.
Well, I do know that when Falkirk returned to action, it was sort of reported in the local press that as you'll be aware, there's one side of the stadium at Falkirk where there isn't anything other than a wall. So there was quite a few supporters peering over the wall, teenagers and all that kind of thing. So it could be done. If we all want to chip in and get a van, we can stand on the top of the van, I suppose. But I would imagine for a tie like that there would be a huge sort of police presence or a decent police presence anyway to stop that. Because it did sort of cross my mind. I thought, I might actually be able to climb a tree or something and see into this ground. But I imagine Mr. Plod will be there to stop that kind of thing. And I'm like you, John. The League Cup holds a lot of fond memories for me. My first final was the League Cup final against Aberdeen in 1987. The 3 each game that went to penalties. So it feels like an entry level cup for up and coming supporters like myself at the time. So aye, and it would be good just to get silverware again. I was looking before we came on air, the finals sort of, I think it's on the 28th of February. So if we could, negotiate our way to the final, it would get us an opportunity to get silverware through the door again, something that we've not seen for far too long. Right, guys, I'll get on to the sort of main agenda now. It's obviously the main talking point through the week. John, I'll come to you first on this. The Scotland on Thursday night, managed to qualify for the Euros, first major tournament for 22 years. I mean, there'll be people in their sort of late 20s who've never experienced, sort of Scotland being in anything, even folks sort of early 30s, I suppose. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it was a kind of given. I can remember 82, 86, 90, the Euros in 92, the Euros in 96, and then the World Cup in 98. I must admit that last one, I didn't think we would go 22 years before we've seen it again. But I was one of these supporters that felt a wee bit indifferent on Thursday night. I must admit my relationship with the national team feels a bit damaged at the moment. I struggle to get any enthusiasm for them. How did you feel? Were you watching the game, and are you a passionate Scotland fan, or are you one of the ones that I'm losing interest in this?
I'm not a passionate Scotland fan. I watch Scotland if they're on. I'm not somebody who would go out my way to get them. So the game was on. It was on free. I don't have Sky, so the game was on free. So I watched it. Well, I watched some of it. I had to go and pick up my son. And and so I had to leave. It was 1-0, and I left the house, and I had it on in the car. I picked him up, and I'm driving back, and the 90th minute, and of course Serbia equalised. And I turned around to my son and I said, this is what Scotland do to you. Scotland find new ways of making you miserable. And that has been my overwhelming emotion towards Scotland, I think, over the last 20 years, is they just seem to keep making you miserable. They find new ways of losing. So I was, when that penalty was saved, I'm surprised you didn't hear me in Falkirk, because I let out a cheer. I was out my chair. To be fair, I was out my chair when we scored as well. Nice goal. I was pleasantly surprised at how well we played, but absolutely not surprised in the slightest when we let in an equaliser in the 90th minute, and frankly fully expected us then to lose. And to not lose. So I think the surprise of not losing and winning penalties is a penalty shootout is a horrible thing. And it's not a nice way for football matches to be decided. But if you win a penalty shootout, that's a fantastic experience. So I have to say, I really enjoyed the evening. I enjoyed the result, but two of my kids stayed up to watch it and were jumping around with joy as well. I think everybody I spoke to, like my wife has no interest. My wife has no interest in football, and she isn't even Scottish. And even she was excited about this when I was talking to her about it after the game. So there is something about international football that is different from club football. It does bring people into an interest in football. They don't normally have an interest in football, and normally these people, Colin, annoy me. Normally these are people I don't want to speak to. See, people who don't really like football but casually get into it for the big games. Go away. You know what? Be here for the rubbish ones, or don't come at all. But
glory hunters, John. That's
absolutely, absolutely right. So, and I normally have no time for these people. But there is something about international football. I lived in Northern Ireland when Scotland were last at the World Cup in France, and that was quite interesting to be abroad, or not in Scotland. When your team is playing, when your country's playing, that was quite an interesting experience. So my relationship with Scotland is very different, and I know we're going to go into this in a little more. My relationship with Scotland national team just now is very different from what it was. The first professional, senior game of football I ever saw in my life was a Scotland game. Scotland against Bulgaria in 1978. I had to look it up earlier I knew it was my first game, but I couldn't remember exactly when it was. It was February 1978. And my second ever senior game was also Scotland, but it was Rangers against Scotland for John Gregg's testimonial. My dad took me to see John Gregg. My dad loved John Gregg and wanted me to see him. I guess that was probably going to be his last game, or one of his last games, and we went along. So but what's interesting is my dad reminded me about this recently, is that going to see Scotland against Rangers so I'd be 7 years old, and going to see Scotland against Rangers in 1978, I supported Scotland. I actually wanted Scotland to win. Although I was a Rangers supporter, I was a bigger Scotland supporter at that stage, because Scotland were big news. We'd just qualified for the Argentina World Cup. No other home nation had. Our players dominated, well, what was the media in those days, which was, Shoot magazine, Scoop magazine, these kind of things. It was our players that dominated it. Ken Dalglish was, arguably certainly the biggest star in UK football and British football. And so supporting Scotland and knowing who was in the Scotland team, that was a big thing. And I would argue at that time, Scotland were probably bigger than club football at that time, in the Scottish national team. Going to the, whether we were playing at Wembley or whether we were playing at Hampden, the Scotland-England game every year was arguably the biggest game of the season. Bigger than the Scottish Cup final, bigger than Rangers-Celtic games. At that time, I would say it probably was. A couple of years later, I was desperate to go and see Rangers games. But at that point, I would get taken to see Scotland games. And I was really quite excited about that. So I kept going to see Scotland all the way through till my early 20s. So right through to, the early 90s, I didn't miss many Scotland games at Hampden. And then I'm not sure what happened. I think, I've tried to think back. I think what happened was Andy Roxburgh happened. And suddenly Scotland became, Scotland, we didn't matter if we won or not anymore. We kind of celebrated losing. And I see as a Rangers supporter, I don't think, we don't celebrate losing. See, when we go to a city or a town and we lose, I want to lay waste to it. I want to pillage the place. Now, I don't, but I do want to, And so see this whole thing with the Tartan Army where we'll sing and we'll dance and it doesn't matter if we lose. That's anathema to me. That's not how I view football. I went to a rugby match once and they do that. And, I found it really difficult. It's like, this is very strange. This doesn't sit with how I was brought up and how I enjoy football. So I think that was a part. But the truth is that there's maybe a bit of kind of casual reductivism there in me, because it's not just one thing. There's been a number of things that have perhaps not strained my relationship with Scotland as much as it has perhaps with some others. But certainly I can't. I can't imagine going to a Scotland game just now. I can't imagine. I certainly wouldn't bring out my way. I mean, if I'll be honest. If someone said, "I've got 2 tickets for Wembley next summer, do you fancy going?" I wouldn't be saying no to that. But I wouldn't be queuing up to go to see a game at Hampden just now. And I've thought before about, should I take my kids along? Would I take my kids along? And I haven't done it because I don't feel that same passion that I do for Rangers. That's the simple truth. But that being said, I do always want Scotland to win. When they're on and they're available to me, I watch them. I normally I curse at them and get really grumpy watching them. But on Thursday night, I have to say that was a pretty good night. I have to say I really enjoyed it. I was really quite happy with it, and I'm a wee bit excited about the summer now.
What about you, Dougie? How did you were you sitting there with the saltire painted on your face, or were you sitting there cursing them?
Not quite the saltire painted my face, but I was definitely sitting in my Scotland top with a beer in my hand. I am a Scotland fan. One of the things that John said interestingly there is around the difference between supporting Scotland and supporting Rangers. And I would completely agree. So I am a Scotland fan. I'm a former member of the Tartan Army. I was raised to be both a Rangers and a Scotland fan. My dad actually talks about times when the Tartan Army was actually majority Rangers fans. John, you'll probably recall that greater than what I do. I was 13 the last time Scotland played in a major tournament. But I enjoyed the game. I'll be honest, I had a tear in my eye at the end, and I think the result was hugely important for people of a younger generation than me, because there is that lack of interest in Scotland at times because we're not successful and we haven't been to a major tournament. But the point I was going to make was around that relationship, because as much as I'm a huge Scotland fan, I wanted to see us win. I was cheering us on. I don't feel the same rage, if I use the word rage, every time we get beaten. And I don't know whether it's because with Scotland you're kind of used to it now. You're used to getting beat. But when Rangers drop points, that's the rest of my day, weekend, week until the next game ruined. When Scotland do get beat, you kind of just brush it off and go, oh well, typical Scotland. So I would say there's definitely a difference in my support for Scotland than Rangers, but I was over the moon on Thursday. I think it's great for the nation to be in a major tournament again.
It's funny that yous are both. I mean, both of yous are saying there that yous are, still Scotland fans and yous were happy on Thursday night when Scotland qualified. I mean, I'm on the other side of the fence, so I must admit it's been a fairly recent thing. I mean, I can still remember the night Scotland played the Republic of Ireland at Celtic Park, and was it Sean Maloney that scored? It was actually a really, really good goal. We were all, me and my two kids, were sitting with Scotland tops on that night. I remember the game against England, the 2-each game, when we went 2-1 up, I'm jumping about in my living room. After Thursday night's game, I sort of thought, right, wait a minute, when did this start? Because there would have been a time when I would have been really excited about Scotland qualifying for a major tournament, and I wasn't feeling that. And I mean, you can go back to the Barry Ferguson thing. I think the way he was treated by the SFA was pretty poor. The way some Rangers players were treated, players that said that they didn't want to play for their country anymore and then came back, guys like Boyd, who were booed and all the rest of it. You had Ian Black being booed, Ryan Jack being booed. Rangers players seem to take a fair brunt of criticism from members of the Tartan Army. I think Lee Wallace got a bit of it as well when he was in there. And I took all that and just kept going. For me, I'm tracing it back to when Alex McLeish was appointed the second time Scotland manager, and the reaction and the criticism and the fact that the guy was never, ever really given a chance and just written off. I think that's when I really started to become, really indifferent towards Scotland. And I had a wee bit of a moment the other night when Marshall saved that penalty. My son was sitting there, and he, as I was saying to you before we came on air, he sort of looked at me as if I was celebrating, and I was just like, no, you know what I mean? And then he sat for 4 or 5 minutes, and then he went up the stair. And it wasn't until I was upstairs I thought, well, wait a minute, he was maybe looking for something there because he's 15. He's never seen Scotland in a major tournament. It wasn't that long ago that I still had some interest. So I've sort of said to myself, you know what, I'm maybe going to try next year and try and get involved in it a wee bit because he's never seen it. But I have to admit, the fact that I'm saying that I have to try shows you that something has went badly wrong in that relationship. And it's not the relationship with my country. When Scotland are playing at rugby, I'm still supporting them. When you're watching Andy Murray, you're still supporting them. I'm proud to be Scottish. But when it comes to the Scottish national football team, I think club rivalry has now entered it, and I don't like it, I must admit, and I feel a bit of an outsider. John, I'll come to you. In terms of that relationship, it feels like it's been deteriorating for a while. What do you think has sort of impacted in that relationship?
There's been a number of things have impacted on it. I think, as I said, I think initially Scotland were bigger. I think the national team were bigger than clubs. Certainly during the 70s and the first kind of half of the 80s. And then maybe that changed. The dynamic there changed and clubs became bigger than the national team. I don't think you can put your finger and say that's one thing. Certainly, coming much more up to date, I agree with you. It has felt like, certainly Ryan Jack, you kind of feel Ryan Jack gets criticised by a section of the Scotland support. And you feel that he's getting criticised for that because of the club he plays for, because he left Aberdeen to join us. And that's why he gets criticised. And that's frustrating because I read a really interesting stat on Friday that a Stevie Clarke Scotland team with Ryan Jack in it has never lost. And I noticed he wasn't playing today. And I noticed, and then we obviously all saw the result. And we know as Rangers supporters how important Ryan Jack is, the job that Ryan Jack does. He is that guy. He's that kind of canty player that does the kind of dirty work, that gives that option, that wins the ball back, that closes space. He's that player that other players love. And we know that. And we know how important he is to a team. And so when you see him being criticised, it's perplexing because he can only be getting criticised for people who either don't understand football or don't like him because of the club he plays for. And I would agree with you that I think there's been an element of that all the way through. I suspect politics plays a part for some in the support. It doesn't play a part for me, but I suspect for some in the support it plays a part. I think the elements of the Scotland support have probably got a kind of reputation for being feeling vocal Scottish nationalists, for example, and I would say that probably plays badly with some in our support, not all clearly, but with some. I find the Tartan Army bewildering, and as a group. I mean, I remember being in the town once and kind of walking up Buchanan Street, and here's these guys, guys in their 40s and kilts and desert boots with hats, with feathers in their hats. And you're like, what the hell is that? Why are you dressed like that? I don't understand that aspect of supporting Scotland. I don't understand that whole getting dressed up like an extra from Outlander. It just baffles the life out of me why people do that. They're not doing any harm, each to their own. But that side of it, I find a little off-putting. I just think, I don't relate to you people. You people are, stick a scarf on and go to the game, support your country and come home. It's not hard. Why are you so? And there's that kind of uber Scotland fan, and that I find a little perplexing. Plus, I think for Rangers supporters as well, there's this kind of feeling that your average Tartan Army guy is actually a chartered accountant from Huntly.
Yeah. And
he doesn't actually have any interest in football. And again, I don't know how fair that is, but I think all of these things have played in. I can remember when Souness was getting, Souness claimed after, and if you recall the interview with Chick Young, who was the wrong guy to interview Souness, but if you recall the interview with Chick Young after he left for us for Liverpool, Souness basically said that he felt he could do no more with Rangers, that he wouldn't be allowed, that he felt that he was at war with the Scottish League and with the SFA, that they didn't like him, they didn't like Rangers being too big for their boots. And I think that kind of started things. I think that was probably an issue. I think the fact that Scotland stopped qualifying for things probably didn't help. And there's been kind of little things since then. I mean, you spoke there yourself about the treatment that McLeish got. I never felt Walter Smith was fully. I never felt people fully valued the job that Walter Smith did. He did a really good job with Scotland. And like guys like Boyd and even Davy Weir, fell out with the management that perhaps weren't welcomed back with open arms.
See, Davy Weir's a funny one though. Davy Weir was welcomed back, but Davy Weir was playing with Everton at the time, and he fell out with Bertie Volts, and that's what I mean. There's a total contradiction in how the Tartan Army treat players who have committed similar crimes. Yeah, but they're obviously basing their opinion on that player on the club that they play for. So Boyd wasn't welcome back. When it was being suggested that Barry Ferguson could come back, then that was a total no-no. But Alan McGregor was allowed to come back.
Yeah,
what I mean? Even although both of them had committed the same offences, but Barry Ferguson was still at Rangers, and or he's sort of seen as the Uber Rangers man. And McGregor had moved on to Hull, so he was welcome back. And Captain Shellsuit, as they all like to call him, there's no chance he's coming back. But both of them committed the same offence.
Yeah.
So there's contradictions in everything that the Tartan Army do.
Do you like international football? I mean, would you watch international football? If the World Cup was on or the European Championship?
And I mean the qualifying games are kind of here or there.
Yeah.
The big Scotland games, I would always watch them. In the qualifying stages, the bigger games, I would always watch them and always support them. And obviously, come whether Scotland are there or not, I'll watch a World Cup or a European Championships. But,
and would you enjoy it? I mean, because it's interesting.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. Yeah, I do.
Because in some ways, I now find that I actually prefer international football at the top level. I think it's fairer. I don't think you have the same. For me, it's one of the things that we've spoken about this before. I love the Europa League. I think Europa League's a great tournament because I think a lot of the teams in the Europa League can win it, whereas the Champions League, half a dozen teams can win it, and now the rest of them are also rans. And I think when you get to the World Cup, you realise actually there's there's probably 10, 11 countries could expect to get to the semi-finals here. Yes, the winner's going to come from a half dozen countries, but and it feels a bit more. I love watching. You get a country doing well, and they've got 3 guys from Real Madrid, and they've got 2 guys that play for Bayern Munich, and they've got a couple of guys from Man City, and then they've got their left back, who plays in the for a second division team in Greece, and he's like the weak link, and you think that's great. That these are teams that are having to try and put together that, and I actually prefer it. So the fact that Scotland are going to be in there again, I'm quite looking forward to, and I feel a bit sad that I don't have that same feeling for Scotland that I had 30 years ago. And I was fascinated at what Dougie was saying there, that he was he was actually a member of the Tartan Army, and I would be interested to know what that was like. What was that experience like? Did you go to away games with them, and what was it like, Dougie?
Basically, I spent most of the time drunk, John.
Well, I mean, given that you were in the Tartan Army, you maybe seen that relationship break down, from closer quarters than me and John did. I mean, we're on the outside, all right, we're Scotland supporters and we'll always watch them, but I was a couch supporter of Scotland. You know what I mean? I've only been to 2 Scotland games in my life, and both of them were in the 80s. So, I mean, you must have seen it break down, close up. And I mean, what was that like? And what do you think are the sort of primary reasons that it has broken down?
Well, we had this debate in the pre-pod discussion, and it was something I was speaking to my father-in-law and brother-in-law today as we were walking around the park with the kids, and there was 4 things that I pointed my finger towards in terms of where that breakdown occurred for me. 3 of them we've spoken about, so the Tartan Army being Rangers players, our relationship with the SFA, our being Rangers a football club, and John mentioned political preferences. I do think political preferences does have a role to play, but I think the 4th point, and it's probably the most important for me, is club allegiances. And you just asked there for my experience in the Tartan Army, and I'm going to give you one. I did go away. We were in Prague for the famous 4-6-0 formation Scotland Craig Levine game against Czech Republic, and I was there with a group of mates. One of them might be listening, Ewan, fellow Rangers fan, fellow Copeland Road seated season ticket holder. We started singing Simply the Best, and an older member of the Tartan Army came over to us and just politely said, "Listen, guys, we keep club allegiances out of the national team." And I actually look back in that. So at the time, we were kind of like, "Oh, shut it," we were a bit tipsy with the Czech beer. But I look back in that actually, and I think it was an important role that the elders of the Tartan Army play. Keeping those club allegiances out. And I'm going to just give you, I love my stats. I'm going to give you a couple, right? So the starting 11 against Serbia, there was 4 current or ex-Celtic players in the starting 11, and there was 4 known Celtic fans when you consider guys like Gallagher, O'Donnell, Robertson, and McGinn. And I do think the club allegiances is where the breakdown is centred around at the moment. We're going to come on to it shortly, chatting about Leigh Griffiths, and I'll pause there, Colin, before we go right into Leigh Griffiths. Don't know if Colin's away. Colin, are you away?
Let's just talk about Leigh Griffiths.
I'm talking. I was talking over my mute there. I'm having an absolute mare tonight. I really am. But anyway, we'll just leave it there.
You need Stevie Clark to manage you now, Colin. I think that's what we're seeing.
You're all right. You're all right. I'll give that a miss. You know what I mean? I would rather be a flair podcast host than someone who just has a rigid system and sounds a bit boring. I don't mind making an arse yet if it makes the people laugh. You know what I mean? So. No, Stevie Clark, no. But I mean, going back to the point, Dougie, it's that club allegiance. I think it's a fair point. I do think. I think John struck on something there with Souness. I think maybe the way Rangers went in the mid '80s, when we started signing a lot of English players, and later on we were signing foreign players and all that kind of thing, and some of your support started, wearing England jerseys and all that kind of thing, but they were kind of doing it but not supporting England. You know what I mean? They were doing it because there was a contingent of England players in the team, but I think outside the Ibrox, I think outside of our support, that sort of generated a bit of dislike and maybe even a bit of hatred towards us, and it just sort of festered. I think also the fact that we stopped qualifying has a point as well. And I think the national debate, the yesers and the better together and all that kind of thing, that sort of made things worse as well, in my opinion. But the club thing that you were talking about, Dougie, the incident with Leigh Griffiths, I think, is key in this, because Scotland qualified for the first time in 22 years, since 1998, for a major tournament. And the first thing he does in that dressing room is he's not celebrating with his fellow players and his teammates and the staff. He's looking to score points on a club basis on Twitter at Kyle Lafferty. Now, whether he knew about Kyle Lafferty's situation with the death of his sister, that is up for debate. Personally, the impression I get from Leigh Griffiths, I don't know if he would do it because of that, but I don't think it would stop him doing it, if you know what I mean. I think he would maybe know and think, well, I don't care. But the point is, straight away, he was into the club sort of allegiance debate. Rather than trying to unite the country, he's trying to, divide it. And this thing that he said in his statement, that we've kind of got a rivalry with Northern Ireland. They qualified and we didn't. So I was just getting back. I was like, well, when did we have a relationship, some sort of rivalry with Northern Ireland? Absolutely no idea about that. I've never heard of that in my life. And it just felt like, again, having a pop when he's got someone in that dressing room who used to be a teammate of Kyle Lafferty's. The first thing he's doing is having a pop. And again, at a time when maybe everyone was maybe going to come together, all day on Thursday, all you could see was debate about that thing, and it got quite heated as far as I could see. In terms of Leigh Griffiths, Dougie, what was your view on it? I thought it was poor. I thought it was a poor act in the first place, and the response was even worse. I thought, that statement that he put out, that was just a shambles, really.
Well, I spent the entire Thursday on Twitter trying to encourage Rangers fans to put club allegiance to a side. And I sat and I watched the game, and I celebrated when Ryan Christie, a current Celtic player, put the ball in the back of the net. And I shed a tear when David Marshall, a former Celtic player, saved the penalty that puts Scotland through to a major tournament. And I've spent that whole time trying to tell supporters to put club allegiances to a side. And within 10 minutes, a Celtic player goes onto Twitter and immediately brings in club allegiances by pointing the finger at or laughing at Kyle Lafferty. Whether he knows about the circumstances with his sister or not is regardless. I can't get my head into the mindset of an international footballer who's just went through that sheer joy and success of international success to pick up the phone and laugh at Northern Ireland. It just doesn't comprehend with me. And then to further compound that, you then had the admin of the Scotland national team page use a quote, "bye 22 years," in reference to Scotland's qualification, which for me is a clear dig at Rangers. Now, people have been critical of me for saying that I think that's a clear dig at Rangers on Twitter, saying that in Steve Clarke's speech, he then said, and bye Celtic next year as well. The context ever since that speech has been bye Rangers. It's got nothing to do with bye Celtic. And I genuinely believe, because there was a fairly anti-Scotland presence on social media from Rangers fans on Thursday, I genuinely believe that was a sly dig from the Scotland national team admin at a time, as you said, Colin, where that result really should unify the nation.
What about you, John? The whole Leigh Griffiths thing, how did you view it?
Well, I'm relieved to hear that Dougie and yourself can't get yourselves into the mindset of Leigh Griffiths, because that's a relief to everybody, because nobody should ever want to be able to relate to Leigh Griffiths. The man's a moron. He is. Have a look at what he said and has done in public before. Leigh Griffiths is the antithesis of what you're looking for in a human being, far less in a football player. I think he's pretty close to being jettisoned by his club. I wouldn't be surprised if that was an attempt at currying favour with an element of their support, which it may or may not have done. I struggle to believe that he was having a go at a guy about his sister. I can't get my head around that. So I'm just going to assume that wasn't the case. That he just didn't know. But it was a ridiculous thing to do, and I agree with you entirely. We have no rivalry with Northern Ireland. Speaking personally, Northern Ireland's my second favourite. I lived in Northern Ireland for a few years. I'm still a regular visitor. I always look for the Northern Ireland score. I really enjoyed their kind of recent run of good form. In fact, the last international football match I was at was a Northern Ireland game. When I lived there, I went to see them play Germany at Old Windsor Park. They got beat, but it's a good game. We don't have a rivalry with Northern Ireland. That's just nonsense. I refuse to allow my support for Scotland to be in any way influenced by Leigh Griffiths. Leigh Griffiths is not somebody I would spend any time thinking about. He is a man. I mean, I hear all this stuff about Leigh. He's got problems. He does have problems. And if he has problems, he has enough money to go and get professional help for them. And his club has enough money to go and get professional help for him. But he keeps making the same mistakes. He is not a normal individual. I agree entirely with both of you. It was a ridiculous thing to do at that time. It was just a farcical thing to do at that time. We've all seen the pictures from the dressing room and from the hotel afterwards. And clearly the guys that were involved in that game enjoyed the evening. They all looked like, and I would, as Dougie said, and I would agree, all I'd say is, look, Leigh Griffiths is an arsehole, if I can use that word. There's no other way to describe Leigh Griffiths. But, Callum McGregor, Ryan Christie, I don't know who else plays for Celtic that was in that team. They didn't do it. They didn't feel the need to have a dig at the opposition. They never feel the need to bring it in. From what I can see, they are, genuinely excited to be playing for their country, genuinely excited to have qualified for a tournament. And I'm happy to lend them my support for 90 minutes during these games. I refuse to let Leigh Griffiths influence that. I just hope Leigh Griffiths just kind of fades away. And he's not fit. That was one of the things that came out. You could see that he's not fit. It's a sad indictment of Scotland just now that he actually gets in that squad because he is not fit. That was quite interesting to see. I don't want to talk about Leigh Griffiths anymore.
Yeah, well, I did notice there was an image doing the rounds after the Celtic's European game the other week there, and it's quite obvious he's not fit. You don't have to watch him playing to see that he's not fit. You just need to look at his body shape. But it just kind of strikes me, as you say, John, he keeps on getting involved in this stuff time and time and time again. And the fact that there was no comment from, the SFA or Steve Clark or even Celtic saying, look, because the statement that Leigh Griffiths put out was it was a rambling mess. You know what I mean? And it was written in sort of street talk. That's pure low, by the way. I wouldn't do that kind of thing. Surely someone should be stepping in and say, right, you've made an arse of this and we need to try and fix it. But no one, he just seems to be left to sort of deal with it on his own, and he just digs himself in a sort of bigger hole. And that's what disappointed me. The fact that no one from the SFA or the Scotland camp or even from Celtic came out to try and clarify everything and totally clear the air. They just let him dig an even bigger hole. And I thought the whole thing was really distasteful, I must admit. And as I said, at a time when you would maybe be looking for the country to feel a wee bit unified for the first time in a long time, the following day it was all about him, which was disappointing. Anyway, as you say, we don't want to talk about Leigh Griffiths anymore. Dougie, we've been linked with Kenny McLean in the papers. It was you that highlighted it to me today earlier on the old WhatsApp. Is that a good move or a bad move? Is it another sort of central midfield player? Do they actually need someone like that? And if they are going to bring someone like that in, does it mean that one of the players that we're looking at that could maybe make us decent money in that area, certainly in the middle of the park, maybe we're looking at Glenn Kamara, it can't be just be in the way all the time. Surely at some point someone has to go and make us a bit of money.
Yeah, I have in good authority that Rangers actually pursued Kenny McLean throughout the summer and made real efforts to sign him during the summer. The story goes that Norwich wanted £10 million for Kenny McLean in the summer, and Rangers, believe it or not, were prepared to go as high as 5. So there was serious interest from the club in Kenny McLean, but I also have it in good authority that Kenny McLean signed a new contract with Norwich, which includes a promotion pay rise. Now, given that Norwich are 1 point behind top at the moment in the English Championship, I have it in good authority that there's no substance to the current rumour. But you've posed a couple of good points there, Colin, because obviously we've gone on and we've signed Bongani Zungu. We've still to really see the best of Zungu. I know he came on and he impressed. For South Africa, he set up the goal, he got the assist, and he also scored. So he certainly impressed for South Africa, and I think we're still to see the best of him, and I'm excited to see the best of Zungu. But it's still a question mark for me at the moment. He's still got to prove himself, and then we'll decide whether we sign him permanently or not. But it does raise a couple of other questions for me. One of them is around who will still be here next season from our midfield. And there's a subset to that point, because one, as you touched on, we will need to sell at some point. A lot of our players are getting a lot of interest from across the world. Glenn Kamara, in particular, played for Finland against France in their 2-0 victory. He will continue to gain interest for his performances both at club and country. So there's definitely that lens, and we need to make sure that we are contingency planning for the time when a player does exit. But there's a question mark for me just now around Stephen Davis. Stephen Davis is one of a couple of players that's out of contract in the summer, and it'll be interesting for me to see where his future lies. Does he, if we win Title 55, bow out as a successful end to his career, or does he still have that hunger? We know he's still got the energy. We see it every game he plays for us and for Northern Ireland. But it'll be interesting to see if he still has that hunger to carry on playing. But there's another point that I wanted to call out, which is I watched the Ross Wilson interview with the Rangers Youth Academy this week, and I actually raised a question that he never got around to answering. And my question was around the homegrown squad registration for the European Cup next season. You look at the squad for this season. We've not been able to register a full, I think it's 25 players, and had to leave guys like Jermaine Defoe out of the squad because we don't have enough homegrown players to register, and therefore we've got a whole bunch of kids registered. So there's when you look at the current squad, I've mentioned Stephen Davis. Another elder statesman that's out of contract this summer is Alan McGregor. We don't know where Alan McGregor's future lies next season as well. But another one's Greg Stewart, and the likelihood is that Greg Stewart will move on at the end of the season, and he's one of the players that's currently registered as being homegrown. So for me, there is a desire. There should be a desire within Rangers to bring in more homegrown players that allows us to register them in Europe. In the summer, we were linked with 3 Scottish players, and those players were Kenny McLean, Stuart Armstrong, and Lewis Ferguson. And I'm going to finish my very long ramble by saying I think in the summer, Rangers will sign at least 1 Scottish player.
Who do you think it'll be, though?
As long as it's no Leigh Griffiths.
Who do I think it'll be? I actually held a couple of vlogs of my own in the summer. One was saying that we had that serious interest in Kenny McLean. As I've ruled that out, I'll then move on to the next one that I done with Stuart Armstrong. Stuart Armstrong actually does have history with Ross Wilson. Ross Wilson is a big fan of Armstrong. At the point of being linked with Armstrong, despite his previous allegiance in Scottish football, he wasn't in the team at Southampton. Given he's now in the Southampton team, I think that kind of rules out Armstrong for me as well. And it then goes down to Lewis Ferguson. He's a player that we're going to see very soon at Ibrox when we go up against Aberdeen. I'll always watch Lewis Ferguson with a keen eye because of who his father and uncle are, and I'll do so again when he comes to Ibrox. I do think that Lewis Ferguson's a decent player, and I think he's not on the same level for me right now as some of the guys in our midfield. But what we've seen with our summer signings is that we bring in guys not necessarily for the first 11 straight away. We bring guys in that boost the squad. We spend the time to coach them into the tactics and the way that Steven Gerrard and particularly Michael Beale like to play football. I could see Lewis Ferguson coming and being a very, very good Rangers player. But I think the challenge around signing Lewis Ferguson will be financial. You know, you've seen Scott McKenna leave Aberdeen this summer. I think it was over 3 million eventually he went for, but he wasn't on form. Certainly the same form that he was when Aberdeen were demanding over 8. It all comes down to how much Aberdeen want for Lewis Ferguson. There was a rumour when Ross McCrory moved to Aberdeen that we did negotiate a deal in there that we would be first option for Lewis Ferguson. It was never confirmed or denied. I'd love it to be true. But again, it's all good being first option. If Aberdeen say that they've got an asking price of £5 million, I doubt we'll pay that.
Well, time will tell, I suppose. You know, we'll all find out. But yeah, the Kenny McLean one, I think I was a wee bit surprised when you said this morning that it had been linked to him. So I suppose we'll find out in the long term.
Can I just ask Dougie a question? 2 seconds.
No.
Do you think?
On you go.
Just quickly. Just what you're saying there about the Scottish players? Do you think if Lyndon Dykes had declared for Scotland last season, we would have signed him in the summer?
John, don't get me started on Lyndon Dykes. Anybody who follows me knows that I done a video specifically about Lyndon Dykes in the summer that, let's say it banged, and people have never let me live it down because one of my mates' parents actually lived next door to Lyndon Dykes, and I kid you not, Lyndon Dykes told his neighbours that he was signing for Rangers. That was the story.
Didn't say which Rangers he was signing for.
Exactly. That was my get out. That was a caveat when he signed for QPR. But I do believe there was genuine interest in Lyndon Dykes from Rangers. I think we negotiated terms with him potentially, but he eventually went to QPR, I think, for £2 million. I would imagine it's probably similar to what I said about Lewis Ferguson. We were probably really interested in Dykes, but we probably didn't value him at £2 million. I don't know what the final figure is that we paid for E10, but I'd imagine for us it was signing a player of a different style, somebody that we can bring on and play a certain kind of long ball style. We've seen it for the game against Kilmarnock. Gerrard talked post-match about he played E10 out in the right so that we could play the long ball and miss out the sticky surface. I think Dykes is that kind of player, and I think he would have given us that option. It was either going to be Dykes or E10, and I think we've gone for the cheaper option.
Interesting. Sorry, Colin.
It's fine. You're doing a better job of hosting than me anyway, John. Conscious of time, guys, so quickly move on to... I thought to have a wee discussion about how well the season's went so far and where we could improve. It kind of feels like mid-term, let's have a look at where we are and take stock a wee bit. John, I mean, it's hard to find any faults really with Rangers this season. We have been operating at a very, very high level. But what's impressed you most about this season so far?
The intensity at which we've been playing has been pleasing. I think often we come back from, in the last couple of years we've had, reasonably good European campaigns, some qualifying and getting games on the Thursday night. But, not always coming back and looking like we're at it. This season, I think we have, which has been pleasing. Obviously, the win against Celtic was not just a tremendous result, but a tremendous performance certainly laid down a marker for the rest of the season. But I think it's been the performances against other clubs that have pleased me, because I think last season we were capable of beating Celtic, and we showed that. But we weren't always up for it against some of the other teams, and I think this season we have. So I think the thing that's pleased me most is that we seem to have learned. We have a better squad this season than last season. Dougie articulated it very well there about Itten, and us figuring out how we play against Kilmarnock, how we play against Livingston, how we play against Hamilton on these horrible pitches against teams that are there not to lose rather than to win. So I think the fact that we seem to have figured that out, and I hate to be a hostage to fortune in that, or tempt fate, but I think that's the thing that's pleased me most, Colin, is that. There were moments, particularly in the European games, where we've played football that's just made me stop and say, is that us? Is that us doing that passing? Is that us playing it so tight and passing our way out? Been wonderful to watch. But I think it's probably that's where I've seen the most improvement, is in figuring out how to beat the teams that we were dropping points against last season.
Yeah, I think you made a good point about the level of some of our football. The two goals against, the goal against Galatasaray and the goal the other week there against Benfica, which, they effectively start on our byline, and we beat that first press. And then that's the way the game is now. You're trying to get up past that first press, and if you do it successfully, if you navigate that, then you're in. And so yeah, absolutely agree with that. Dougie, is there anything that again, it's when we're 11, 12 games into the season, we've only conceded 3 goals. We've beat Celtic, we've qualified for the Europa League, we've beat Galatasaray, should have beat Benfica. We're sitting in a very strong position in both domestically and the Europa League. But is there anything that's still giving you a wee bit of cause for concern, or is everything ticky to do?
My biggest concern, especially this year, is that anything can happen to our players. I have the genuine fear that we, especially with, I think we've got 14 players on international duty. We're obviously travelling to various countries at the moment with the Europa League. I just have the fear that we could have our squad put into quarantine. And I think we've spoken before around the SPFL won't do us any favours. But I want to go back to the previous question just briefly, Colin, because one of the things that I'd spoken about previously is our year-on-year comparison to last year. And we're only one draw better off than what we were last season. But I think the important point to pull out is the away games that we've had in the first part of the season. We've been to Aberdeen, Livingston, Hibs, Motherwell, Celtic, Kilmarnock. These are all the tough places to go historically for Rangers. So as you look to the next part of the fixtures, I go in with confidence, and I go in with confidence for a couple of reasons. I completely agree with what John was saying there around the intensity and the high level of performances. But the other things I'm going in with confidence for just now is, one, we're not relying on Morelos for goals. We're getting goals from all around the pitch. Two, we're able to rotate the squad without compromising the quality. I spoke earlier on around E10. The strikers that we have at our disposal, you've got Morelos, Roof, E10, Defoe, able to be bringing in. That's the type of squad that you need to challenge across an entire season. But the last thing for me is I'm excited about the players that have still to kick on. Aribo started very well, but he had that period out. You've seen him flying again, and he gets double against Hamilton. But I'm excited about Roof. Roof is still to really get going. He obviously had his injury at Anderlecht, and then he picked up his injury again back here. I think we're still to see the best of Roof. And we've touched on Zungu earlier on as well. I'm genuinely excited for the next part of the season, because between now and January we've got some good games, and I'm looking forward to seeing more good football. That Benfica goal in particular, I listened to the podcast when Big Alex was talking about that goal. That was just a stunning goal, and the football that we are playing just now is a joy to watch.
You can't deny that. When we hit top level, as John said there are times you're like, is that us? Is that Rangers I'm watching? When you consider where we were even just a couple of years ago, it's impressive to see. Guys, moving on to next week, next Sunday, 12 o'clock at Ibrox. might be acting a wee bit paranoid here, but I'm questioning why that game's been moved to the Sunday. But that's just me being a paranoid android. John, Aberdeen are actually in a good vein of form at the moment. They're sitting second in the form table. They've had 4 wins from the last 6, 2 draws. Could be a tricky game, do you think, or do you feel confident given the way we're playing at the moment?
Aberdeen's always a tricky game, and like you say, they're in decent form. Certainly, they're in we've a funny relationship with the Aberdeen manager, haven't we? And obviously we fairly publicly quoted him, and that all kind of fell apart. And thank goodness it did, because obviously that then opened the door for Gerrard, and I don't think there's any regrets there. But I think what you'd have to say is Aberdeen looked in the summer, they lost a couple of decent players. And looked in the summer like that might be them, and he's rebuilt them again, and they look hard to beat. It's interesting what we were talking about earlier about signing Scottish players. I tell you what, if McCrory hadn't ever played for Rangers before and had just come through at Aberdeen, we'd be getting linked with him just now. He's playing well, so I'm pleased that he can't play against us, because I think him and Ferguson have linked up really well in Aberdeen's midfield and look good. Yes, it'll be a hard game. We need to be on it. I think we're on the Sunday. I think they've put us on the Sunday because it's on Sky. And I think Sky like to kind of show the Rangers games, or the Scottish games rather, on a Sunday. I'm not disappointed it's on a Sunday, because I think Scotland are playing on Wednesday in Israel. Is that right? Hopefully someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're playing on Wednesday.
I don't take any interest in the national team. I didn't even know they were playing the day, I have to be honest with you. It was like 10 minutes before the kickoff and I saw the team. I was like, what's Scotland playing? Sorry.
No, it's all right. So there's a game against Israel in Israel. So, it's as far away as you can be playing in European tournaments. So, there's the guys on the players that are away, Jack and Jack and McLaughlin, plus whoever. There's a few of the under-21s as well, I think. So there'll be guys coming back late. There's obviously a lot of other Rangers players coming back from wherever their countries are playing. So I'm not disappointed that we get an extra day there. I think that's probably in our favour. I hate the midday kickoffs, but I think that's probably in our favour. Yeah, we'll need to be at our best, but on current form, we should still win. And without McCrory, Aberdeen are slightly weaker. But yourself, Aberdeen raise their game for us. They always do. Whatever they claim, they always raise their game for us. And I don't suspect Sunday will be any different. So we'll need to be at it from day one, from the first minute.
Dougie, obviously we won the first game of the season up at Pittodrie, 1-0. Ryan Kent with the goal. And it was compared to what the games are normally like up there, obviously the no supporters made a difference. It made it a slightly different fixture that wasn't quite as stressful as they normally are. But one guy that was missing from that game was Sam Cosgrove. I think he was injured at the time. He's back now. He's sort of made his return in the last sort of 3-4 weeks there, starting to score again. Could he add an extra dynamic to this game that we didn't have to deal with up in Pittodrie?
Yeah, he'll definitely improve them. Cosgrove's a decent player. Aberdeen have got a decent starting 11. I do think, as John said, McCrory not being in the team will weaken them. And I think that was probably part of the strategic move of loaning McCrory out for this season, is that he can play against teams like Celtic, but he cannot play against teams like Rangers. So that for me, that was a smart move to loan McCrory. As John said, McCrory's form has been very good. We probably would be linked with him because of his form's been so good, but a lot of people have been vocal on social media around not understanding why we let McCrory go to Aberdeen. I just want to be very clear that McCrory wanted to leave Rangers. Ross McCrory didn't want to be a bit part player. He felt at his age he had to be playing regular first team football. So, but yeah, I was building up to. I have actually a prediction for the team lineup, because I mentioned earlier on around the fact that we played E10, for example, against Kilmarnock. We've certainly seen our team being pretty flexible based on the opponents. Benfica suited Morelos, it suited Davis spraying the balls for Kent in behind. Hamilton, we had the pacey and attacking front line. I suspect we'll be very, very different when we go against Aberdeen. I think we'll be more rigid, more aggressive in our lineup. And I think, given that Cosgrove is playing, I think that actually suits Balogun better. Balogun did go off in the Nigeria game against Sierra Leone with an injury. I'm hoping it's not too serious and he is fit for that game, because I think he had 100% of aerial duels won in that game. In fact, Nigeria were 4-1 in the lead at the point where Balogun went off and the game finished 4 each. So I think that game against Aberdeen probably suits Balogun, and therefore I would imagine the back line will be pretty obvious of McGregor, Tavernier, Goldson, Balogun, Barisic. But I think, given my comment about the rigid and aggressiveness, I think we'll probably avoid playing Kamara in the middle. We'll probably go with Jack Davis in our field. And up front, I think up front it's going to be really interesting, because we've seen Morelos get into physical battles with the Aberdeen defenders in the past. Obviously, they've got Considine still there. I don't think we'll go into that battle. I think we'll have Benfica in mind, and thinking about what players do we want to play against Benfica as well. And we probably wouldn't start Roof at home against Benfica. It suits Morelos better. And therefore, I think that Roof will start against Aberdeen. And I think either side of him, I think it will be Aribo and Kent. But I think that'll be designed to be more aggressive with the midfield. But I think it's to exploit the lack of pace in the Aberdeen backline.
We'll find out next week at lunchtime. 11 o'clock. So once the team's out, I'll give you a wee message and see how you've done. Right, guys, conscious of time. So I think we can wrap it up for tonight's show. So a big thanks to John and Dougie for their professional contributions tonight, given my shambolic performance on the hosting chair. We'll be here next week for the game, obviously the game at Ibrox next week against Aberdeen, so there'll be a show next Sunday covering that. We're also looking to get a show out on Friday night, maybe to preview the Aberdeen game a bit more comprehensively, but we'll see how we get on with that. In the meantime, get yourself onto the website and forums at www.gersnet.co.uk. Guys, as I say every week in these strange times, stay safe. It looks like some of us, including the super spreaders in the West End of Glasgow, I'm thinking of you, John McCallum, are going to go into level 4, and it's all still a bit strange at the moment. So look after yourself, follow the regulations, and until next time, bye for now.